What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Monday, August 19th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. Feels weird being back doing a show. Haven't done one since last Wednesday, but looking forward to talking through this one. I think it's a pretty interesting tournament slate. There are not really any teams with massive implied run totals. There's also not a ton of good pitching on the slate. It's just kind of a weird slate where pitching, most of the pitchers are like not horrible, but they're not very good, especially from a fantasy standpoint. Not a lot of really good strikeout pitchers. Not a ton of really good hitters parks on the slate. There are a few, so those teams will stand out a little bit more. But should be a pretty interesting slate to talk about. I'm curious to see where I'd be getting to. I haven't looked too closely yet at what showed up in my initial sim. As a reminder, some of these lineups have come out since I ran my lineups. I know the Angels lineup is out, but any lineup up here that does not have a green check is a lineup that I did not have the actual lineup when I built my lineups. So if I happen to say that I'm getting a lot of somebody who's not in a lineup, it's just because I didn't realize that lineup came out. So feel free to let me know. Right now, I think the Angels are the only lineup that we've gotten since I ran my stuff. So that's nice, but I'm sure we'll get some during the show. As always, give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so you get alerts when these shows go live. Obviously, the YouTube schedule will be changing up a little bit with NFL starting, with NBA starting. Shows will be, maybe at different times, obviously for NFL. So be sure to turn the notifications on. And also, if you haven't already signed up for Endgame Syndicate, the link for that is in the description below. Highly recommend doing that soon. We will be getting some NFL stuff, strategy stuff up before the season starts. So get your process in place ahead of time, as opposed to losing for the first few months of the season, or first few weeks rather of the season, and then having to kind of revamp what you're doing. Highly recommend checking that out. You'll also get one more members only roundtable Q&A before the season starts. So sign up for that if you haven't already. Now, starting things off with pitching as usual. And as a reminder, this is a show where I'm talking about how I will be approaching, or would be approaching, the large field DraftKings tournament. So I'm not going game by game. If you do have questions about why maybe I'm not getting to a pitcher or a team that you like, feel free to ask. If I have a specific reason, I will let you know. But a lot of times the answer is just going to be that it's only 150 lineups and you have to draw the line somewhere. But going to go position by position and stack by stack as I go through what I'd be getting to if the slate started right now. So starting with the pitching, Yusei Kikuchi showing up as my highest owned guy at 48%. He's projected to be the second highest owned pitcher on the slate. It is far from a safe matchup with Boston, but like I was saying, this is just kind of a weird slate where, for the most part, the better pitchers have pretty tough matchups, and good offenses also, as a result, have pretty tough matchups. So kind of a weird slate in that regard. The Red Sox do strike out a bit. Their active roster against left-handed pitching does rank 5th in strikeout percentage, and they also have a 110 WRC+. Now, keep in mind, those numbers are also a little bit misleading because Boston is a team that platoons. So the actual strikeout percentage of their lineup, I don't have it in front of me, but I think it's likely lower than that 25% mark because you're not getting as many left-handed hitters in there against Kikuchi. Similarly, the 110 WRC+ most likely is higher because those weaker hitters just aren't in the lineup. But one way or the other, it is a decent strikeout matchup for Kikuchi, and he is one of the best strikeout pitchers on the slate. 27.5% K percentage is third highest behind Michael King and Taj Bradley. 3.33 xFIP is tied with King for the best on the slate. So Kikuchi is pretty clearly one of the most talented pitchers going today. Obviously, it's still scary. The Red Sox can hit. Kikuchi is having a very good year this year, but it's not like this is somebody that is very far removed from being a pitcher that would get some strikeouts, but also give up a ton of home runs. It is a risky spot, but 8,500 is a good price tag for the strikeout upside that he offers compared to most of the slate. And as I've talked about before, also, there's no such thing as a floor in baseball, but strikeouts are going to give you as much of a floor as you can reasonably ask for. You're generally going to be better off going after strikeout pitchers, even if the matchup is a little bit scary, as opposed to going to guys that don't get strikeouts because they're in a quote-unquote good matchup. Just because pitchers that don't miss bats are still very vulnerable to just getting unlucky in any given game. Balls put in play, find holes, they end up giving up a few runs. And if they give up those runs, it's very hard for them to make those points back if they're not good strikeout pitchers. Whereas somebody like Kikuchi at 8,500 can give up 3 or 4 runs. Obviously you're not hoping that happens if you roster him, but he can do that and then just turn around, strike out 8 guys, and you're still fine. So strikeouts do generally just give you a little bit higher floor than targeting good matchups. So that's another thing working in Kikuchi's favor here, even though it is obviously not a safe spot. Taj Bradley showing up 42% of the time for me, have him projected for about 27% ownership. I like this one a lot. Bradley has had power issues this year, and the A's do have plenty of power in their lineup, as we've seen throughout the entire season, as they continuously just win tournaments, it seems like once a week. But this is a park that downplays home runs, which is nice. And Taj Bradley does have the second highest strikeout percentage on the slate, as I mentioned a minute ago. The A's strike out a lot too. Their active roster ranks 5th in K percentage against right-handed pitching this year at 25%. They do have that 104 WRC plus, like I said. But Bradley also strikes out hitters from both sides of the plate at nearly an identical clip, 29.8% to lefties, 27% to righties, so a little bit higher to lefties. Has a good splitter that gets a lot of swings and misses against them. He doesn't throw it quite as often to righties. That's the reason for the difference in strikeouts. But he is somebody that can just mow down both sides of the plate. The park limits power. The 9K price tag is certainly reasonable here. It's $1,000 less than King. It's $500 less than Lugo. So I like getting the Bradley quite a bit. He also grades out pretty well in my pitch type model as far as how the A's hitters do against the pitches that he throws, the locations he throws them in. That's not a huge deal, but it does make me like him, a little bit more than I would otherwise. But I would like him a lot one way or the other. So he's showing up a lot. I'm happy with that. Kevin Gausman, I'm over the field as well. 23% projected ownership. I'm getting to 37%. This one is scary to me because Gausman has very, very clearly taken a step back this year, and there's an obvious reason for it. He's only struck out 21.4% of hitters, 4.18 xFIP, 1.23 home runs allowed per 9 innings. He's allowed power to both sides of the plate, and his splitter just simply has not been nearly as effective this year as it has in recent seasons when he's been really good. And if you're somebody that has really followed Gausman's career, as I'm obviously very familiar with since he came up with Baltimore, it's a pitch he really needs. His fastball he throws hard, but his fastball is not like a great pitch that he can really rely on. He doesn't have really good, off breaking stuff outside of the splitter. So it's a pitch that when it's good, he's good, and when it's bad, he sucks. And so it is scary getting to him, but you are getting a Reds team that has strikeouts in their lineup. They have the 6th highest K percentage against right-handed pitching this year. They only have a 92 WRC plus on their active roster. And Gausman is only $8,800. This is a pitcher that when that splitter was good and you were getting strikeouts like you were in the past, he was a 10K pitcher. So the salary has adjusted at least a little bit. One other negative for Gausman that does concern me, and I don't know, I haven't looked yet if I'm getting to Cincinnati stacks, but I would actually like to be for this reason. Kevin Gausman is not good at preventing stolen bases. And the Reds have a lot of guys that run. Ellie De La Cruz, obviously, like 59 stolen bases this year. But India runs. Steer has 20 stolen bases. There are guys in this lineup outside of De La Cruz that will run. And Gausman's really bad at controlling that. So not only is he somebody that gives up a lot of power, and that is one way that things can go poorly, but also if he just walks the wrong guy or gives up a ground ball through the hole to the wrong guys, those can very quickly become doubles instead of singles and just make it even more difficult for him to prevent runs. So there are things that really scare me about Gausman. Not that I'm like super confident in Kikuchi or Bradley, but I do feel less confident in Gausman than those two just because of all of the potential issues that I see. But again, that being said, it is overall a pretty good matchup against Cincinnati. It is also a park downgrade for them. Rogers Center, not terrible for hitting, but it's not Great American Ballpark. So in the context of the slate, Gausman does look good. I understand why I'm getting a lot of him. It also scares me. And like I said, I haven't looked at my stacks yet. I would love to be seeing Cincinnati in my non-Gausman lineups. I don't know if I will be or not, but I'm actually hoping to. Joe Boyle, I saw somebody right at the top of the show on Steinium said, what side do you prefer, Joe Boyle or the Rays? I haven't looked at my stacks yet, so I don't know what I'm getting to as far as the Rays go. I am around 2x the field on Joe Boyle here at 7K, and the reason is simply the strikeout upside. This is about as volatile a pitcher as you're going to get, and on some slates, I wouldn't really want to deal with that. If you have a lot of really good pitching, then I'm not going to want to be messing around with a guy that walks 15 to 20% of the hitters that he faces and all of the issues that come along with that. Losing points on DraftKings for walks, elevated pitch counts, all of that stuff obviously is a problem. And if the opportunity cost is high at pitcher, or if he's really popular, I probably wouldn't want to deal with it. But opportunity cost isn't very high at pitcher today. We've already talked about, Kikuchi, Bradley, Gossman. They all look pretty good, but they're all at least somewhat scary in their own right. And then you have a 7K pitcher in Boyle that is getting some ownership, but not a ton of it. And he does have good strikeout stuff when he's not walking you. In my game by game article that is available for Endgame subscribers and my Dub Club subscribers, my comparison was basically that like he's Joey Gallo as a pitcher. Joey Gallo was somebody that we really liked in DFS because he was just going to strike out, hit a home run, or walk. It's kind of the same thing here with Boyle minus the home runs because he doesn't get hit very hard. His stuff is really good. But at AAA this year, he either struck out or walked nearly 50% of the hitters that he faced. In the majors, it's been around 40% because the strikeout percentage has gone down. He has about a 23% K percentage in the majors so far. He's walked 17% of hitters. Again, there is nothing safe about going to him. Tampa Bay does strike out a lot. They have a top 10 strikeout percentage top 5 strikeout percentage on their active roster against right-handed pitching this year. They also have a top 10 walk percentage. So very, very volatile spot, but the upside is obviously there when you're looking at a slate where the only pitchers today that have a higher strikeout percentage this season than Joe Boyle's 23% are Michael King, who's $10,000, Taj Bradley, who's $9K, Kikuchi, who is $8,500, and Dane Dunning, who we'll talk about later, but he is only $6,600, but obviously has his own issues. So you just don't have the same sort of opportunity costs today. I have no issue paying down and just hoping that we somehow get a good Joe Boyle game where he gives you like 5 innings, strikes out like 7 guys, and then you just move on. The salary being as cheap as it is does obviously lower the risk a little bit too, just because the margin for error is a little bit bigger. But I am getting to him around 2x the field. I think that's fine. I'm getting a little over half the field on Michael King here. There's a couple of things I don't like. One is the salary. He's 10K. I don't think he's drastically better than the other pay-up options. Like I said, very similar strikeout percentage to Taj Bradley this year, although he hasn't given up nearly as much power. 3.33 xFIP is the same as Kikuchi, who's $1,500 less. Strikeout percentage is slightly higher. So I think King is the best pitcher on the slate from a talent standpoint. I think it's difficult to argue that. But at 10K, I don't really know that he is that much better than the alternatives. The other thing is that the matchup here is tough. Minnesota's active roster ranks 21st in strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching. They have been well above average as far as production goes with a 109 WRC+. So while Bradley's facing a strikeout-heavy team and Kikuchi's facing a strikeout-heavy team and Gossman's facing a strikeout-heavy team, you have King, who does by a small margin have the best strikeout stuff, facing a team that is difficult to strike out. So that combined with the salary and the fact that he's the highest owned guy on the slate, I think is why I'm just not getting as much as the field is. That being said, still, in 1/5 to 1/4 of my lineups, it's not somebody that I'm just running away from or anything. It's very obvious that he's one of the best pitching plays on the slate, but I'm just not getting quite as much as the field, and those are the reasons why. Tanner Houck, so those 5 are the guys that I'm getting the most exposure to. Then there's a really big drop-off. Tanner Houck showing up 8% for me against Houston. Absolutely brutal matchup. The Astros are very difficult to strike out. Houck has about a 21% strikeout percentage this year. Still no Alex Bregman for the Astros, so that does water the lineup down a little bit. Victor Caratini is batting 5th for them today. This is still not an easy lineup, but as far as Houston Astros lineups go, this is about as good as it can get for an opposing pitcher. Caratini, Myers, Cabbage, Dubon, Whitcomb is 5 through 9 in this order. Obviously, no Kyle Tucker, who's been out. No Alex Bregman, as I mentioned. So this lineup is weaker than you normally get. It is still a very difficult team to strike out. It is still an above-average offense. You do still have to deal with Yordan Alvarez, etc. But Houck is a good pitcher overall. And at very little ownership, I think he's a good guy to mix into those lineups where maybe you're going to like Kansas City or one of the more popular teams. You're not sacrificing a ton as far as ceiling goes for Houck. What you're sacrificing is medium projection, likelihood of reaching that ceiling. But when things go well for Houck, his upside is not really lower than most people. So as a low-owned guy in those specific lineup types, I think that's fine. Kyle Harrison, I'm getting about half the field here. I understand why he's getting 16% ownership. The White Sox are obviously a good matchup. San Francisco is a great park to pitch in. All of that is true. Harrison is a pretty just like average pitcher, 21.9% K percentage, 4.27 xFIP. If you told me that you wanted to dial back some of the Kevin Gossman at 8,800 and turn it into some more Harrison at 7,900, I think that would be perfectly fine. They've been very similar pitchers so far this season. Obviously, in the past, Gossman has a much better track record than Harrison, who's a young, relatively unproven pitcher. But yeah, so this is a spot where like there's nothing glaring about Harrison why I am getting less than the field, other than I just would rather have more Kikuchi, Bradley, Gossman, Boyle. The way that things are showing up here, Boyle is less expensive, getting less ownership. I don't think the range of outcomes is drastically different for Boyle or Harrison. Dane Dunning is one guy that I'm not getting to, and I really kind of wish that I was. Not to the extent that like I'm manually going to adjust anything or anything like that. But if I were to have run this, and I said this in my game by game article too, when Dunning wasn't showing up for me, if I were to have run all this and I was getting some Dane Dunning at 6,600 and low ownership, I really wouldn't be upset about it because the matchup against the Pirates is decent. They rank 9th in strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching this year. They have an 88 WRC plus. As a starter this year, Dunning has actually struck out 25.7% of hitters with a 4.04 xFIP. The problem is that he's allowed 1.7 home runs per 9 innings. He's walked 11% of the hitters that he's faced, and he's not going to be allowed to go that deep into the game because Texas does typically try and prevent him from going through the order that third time. He is stretched out enough, though, that at 6,600, we're not worried about him getting pulled after like 3 innings if he's pitching well. He threw 76 pitches his last time out. If he's pitching well, you can easily get 5 innings out of him. But he's not somebody that's likely to be allowed to just go out there and get that like 6th, 7th, 8th inning. Even if he is pitching well, they're probably going to not let him go through the lineup the third time. But he has shown good strikeout stuff this year. He is cheap. He is not popular. All of that said, I'm not getting there, and neither is the field. But if you're somebody sitting there watching this show saying, I kind of like Dane Dunning, I would say that, like, in my head, I agree with you. It's not being borne out by my process, my data, all of that. And that's what I am pretty much always going to go with. But I certainly wouldn't want to talk you off of it if you're playing around with the idea. I think it makes sense. The rest of it, David Peterson not showing up a lot for me. I do have his overs. I bet over 4.5 Ks earlier at like minus 155. I bet over 5.5 at plus 130, but not getting there in DFS. It is a tough matchup against the O's. It is a pretty good park to pitch in, but not a lineup that strikes out a lot and not an easy lineup to face either. So not really getting there. Lugo, another pitcher getting some ownership that I'm not really getting to. Anybody that has watched my shows throughout the season shouldn't be surprised by this. I very, very rarely get to Seth Lugo at this price tag. If you are, or if I were going to play Seth Lugo, this is the kind of slate where I would do it because there's not as much opportunity cost at pitcher. The reason that I typically don't get to him at the same level as the field at this price tag is just because he's about a 21% K rate guy. He's good at preventing runs. He can work pretty deep into games. But like I was saying earlier, I generally just chase strikeouts a lot more so than, oh yeah, I need this guy to go 6 innings, strike out 4 guys and get a win. That, especially when they're relatively popular and expensive. So I think he is a good pitcher. I think that the matchup here against the Angels is very good. The Angels are a well below average offense against right-handed pitching. They're top, like I think they're 11th in strikeout percentage. They're up to 8th in strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching. All of that is true. It's just at that ownership and price, I'd rather be getting to some of these cheaper guys that do offer more strikeout upside. Kikuchi, Bradley in particular. But if you have Seth Lugo lineups, wouldn't talk you off of them. It's just not somebody that I typically prioritize. The other thing to keep in mind, and this is somewhat baked into his strikeout numbers for the season since he pitches in Kansas City, Kauffman Stadium is one of the most difficult parks to get strikeouts in all of baseball. So that's one reason his strikeout numbers are where they are this year, but also this game being played there certainly doesn't help. I think that's all of the pitchers that are getting ownership. Yeah, so that's how pitching's showing up for me right now. Trying to catch up on some stuff in chat. Talked about Boyle. Steven Leibowitz said, I like Bradley. Just curious why his last 3 starts have not been great. Probably variance. Honestly, I haven't looked into it, but probably variance. He is somebody that does give up some power, but he does also, have good strikeout stuff. And on this particular slate, can't be that picky because there's pretty big question marks about just about anybody. Don Dizzle said Baltimore native here as well. That's awesome. Do you still live there? Corbin Carroll Do I think Corbin Carroll and Jock Peterson get one hit today? I don't know. I haven't looked at hitter projections. That game's not even on the slate. I think they're facing Miami and some pitcher I've never heard of. Wouldn't want to answer that because I have no idea and would just be throwing something randomly out there. John Musto said, "Are you playing any Harrison?" I'm about half the field. I have 8%. Field's at 16. So looking at stacks now, and oh, good, I am getting to a decent amount of Cincy, but KC leading the way, followed by Tampa, followed by Toronto, Pitt, Texas. This is all stack types, so mini stacks and five mans included. KC, I think, pretty self-explanatory. Pretty good matchup going up against Carson Fulmer. He has given up a lot more power to lefties than righties this year, but this is a good park for offense. It's good for everything other than hitting home runs. But Kansas City is built to play in this park as well. They have speed that you can take advantage of balls in the gap. They'll look to steal bases. Michael Massey, Vinny Pasquantino, MJ Melendez, all hitting in the top five from the left side. So they're all going to look good with what Fulmer struggles with. And then you have Witt hitting second, Perez hitting cleanup. Goes without saying, those guys are both nice to get to. Freddie Fairmean hitting sixth, Frazier hitting seventh from the left side, DeYoung, Isbell at the bottom of the order. So some cheap guys there that have at least some upside. So Kansas City is going to look good. Not sure yet if I'm getting to them as five mans or more so as minis, but they're the team I'm getting to the most. Also, not surprising that I'm pretty flat here as far as teams that I'm getting to because a lot of the offenses just look very similar on this slate, as I said at the top. So unless the field were just projected to be like wildly incorrect on how they're going to handle an offense, I would want to be pretty balanced just because the range of outcomes for most of these teams is pretty much the same. So I'm not surprised to see that I'm pretty flat on these offenses. Tampa Bay showing up second. Not my favorite type of pitcher to stack against in Boyle because of the fact that he just either strikes out or walks such a high percentage of the guys that he faces. But still working for Tampa Bay is that they are pretty cheap for the most part. And even though scoring runs off of a pitcher because he walks two or three guys and then gives up a single is not going to win you tournaments, there is still something to be said for just getting additional plate appearances as a result of him putting guys on base. Also, something that I know I've mentioned before is that when you get these pitchers with high walk rates, normally they're just going to walk a lot of guys, but there are also, it does mean also that they're typically working behind in counts a lot. And so that does open the door for hitters to be in advantageous counts where, instead of throwing ball four, maybe he misses over the plate with a fastball and it gets launched. Obviously, that's not typically what he does, but that it does open the door for that. But also the probably biggest part is that even if let's say Tampa Bay goes out there and just hangs like 6 or 7 runs on Joe Boyle in the first 3 innings, but it's just all on the back of walks, singles, maybe a double here or there, stuff where the Rays have 7 runs, but the guys in your stack all have like 8 points or 10 points, and it's not exactly what you want. The nice thing is still that most likely Oakland won't be using their best relievers throughout the rest of the game. So it does increase the chances of you adding on runs against weaker parts of the bullpen later on. And also, like, let's say the first guy that Oakland brings in out of the bullpen, whoever that is, let's say they don't have their best stuff and they give up another 3 runs and now it's like 8-0 or 9-0. Oakland very well may just leave him out there, let him give up a bunch of runs, save the bullpen for another day, as opposed to, matching up and bringing in the best relievers they can for different situations. So that is one positive. Even if you're not scoring runs the way that you want off of Boyle, it does still increase the upside of that stack throughout the rest of the game because of the relievers that they'll be facing later on. So all of that considered, I don't love Tampa Bay, but I don't really love any stacks on this slate. I think just like the pitching, they all have pretty negative or pretty substantial, but this or that. In the case of Tampa Bay, it's that Boyle doesn't give up a lot of power. He just walks you or strikes you out. And the park isn't good for offense, but they are fairly priced. You're going to get really good lineups around them as well. Toronto going up against the pitcher making his major league debut, who does not project to be very good, in somebody that I'm already blanking on his name, even though I just looked it up. Julian something. Anyway, doesn't project to be a very good pitcher. He hasn't been great at the AAA level. Julian Aguilar, I think, hasn't been good at AAA, doesn't project to be good in the majors, doesn't have great strikeout stuff, projects for like a 5 FIP in the major leagues. Toronto has plenty of power in their lineup, and they are also reasonably priced, with the exception of Vlad Guerrero. They are pretty cheap. Guerrero coming in at 5,700, but obviously that is perfectly fine. Or 5,500. I was going off the top of my head, but 5,500 it looks like. Varsho's batting second. He's cheap. Will Wagner hitting sixth. He's cheap. So those two stand out as far as values go. Spencer Horwitz batting cleanup is cheap. Kirk batting fifth is cheap. Springer's only 4,500, I think, leading off. So they just look good from both the matchup standpoint and also the fact that you're just going to get really good lineups around them. Just like with Tampa Bay, that's something that I think is really important to keep in mind. There's always a focus on, this stack is facing this pitcher in this park, and how can they fail, et cetera, et cetera. But what a lot of making good lineups comes down to is, if your stack succeeds, what are the chances that the rest of your lineup does well? And, that just comes down to being price sensitive. And it's why a lot of times, if you look at the stacks that are showing up the best for me, or even if you look in like my top stacks tool that I post for Endgame or Dub Club subs, a lot of times the teams that are showing up as the top stacks aren't necessarily the teams with the highest implied run totals. And it's a function of, a lot of times the team with the highest implied run total, really you have to sacrifice the pitching you're getting to, or you have to sacrifice the other hitters that you're playing around them. Whereas a team with, like a 4.8 total is a lot cheaper, still going to have a big game often enough. And when they do have a big game, you just have studs around them. And I think that's what you're going to see with Toronto lineups. We can take a look at some of them quickly, but I would expect to have good pitching and good hitting around them. So here we have a Toronto four-man: Kikuchi, Bradley, Shohei Ohtani, Brandon Lau. So obviously, and then, paid down a little bit on Bart and Barger. Bart and Caballero. But Brandon Lau, obviously good. Shohei Ohtani, obviously great. Next, we have a 4-4 with Seattle, where, again, you're getting two Kikuchi, Bradley. You're getting Raleigh, who looks like one of the best hitters today. Rosarena looks very good in that park as well. Kikuchi, Bradley again. This is just a two-man. I guess I could look at the five-mans. That would be probably a little bit more what I'm trying to point out here. Very flat on five-mans here, as you can see. But looking at the Toronto five-man specifically, Gossman, Bradley, Josh Lowe, I like. This has Guerrero too, so it didn't save as much money. Here, no Guerrero, but playing Ohtani over him, getting to Michael King, getting to O'Neill Cruz, who's priced up. So you can see that you're getting the good pitching, you're getting the pretty good bats, and that's going to be part of the appeal of Toronto, in addition to going up against a guy making his major league debut, all of the volatility that comes with that, and just upside in this park as well. Pittsburgh showing up fourth most for me. That one's interesting because they are pretty expensive. I think the spot against Dunning is pretty nice. I mentioned it when I was talking about Dunning. Strikeouts have been there. Everything else has been pretty bad, though. Allowing, like I said, 1.7 home runs per nine, walking 11% of the hitters that he has faced. Lefties in particular have really done damage. 249 expected ISO against him. And this is including time that he's worked out of the bullpen as well. But a 249 expected ISO, 277 expected ISO, or actual ISO rather. And it's a nice park bump for the Pirates as well, going from PNC to whatever they call Texas. I don't remember if it's still Globe Life or not, but whatever they call Texas is a better place to hit than PNC is. The only negative is that the Pirates are really expensive, and I don't really know why, but you have Brian Reynolds coming in at like 5,700. You have O'Neill Cruz coming in at 5,300, I think it is. So they are pretty expensive. But other than that, it's actually a pretty nice spot in this park against a pitcher that does give up power. And outside of those two, the lineup is actually cheap. So I guess I should take it back. The two guys that I want the most, Reynolds and Cruz, are expensive. Brian Reynolds looks great to me, price aside. O'Neill Cruz looks very good. When you talk about left-handed power against Dunning, those are the guys that obviously stand out. They're both very expensive. Outside of that, the full stack is cheap. Joey Bart batting cleanup, $3,900 catcher. Connor Falefa leading off at $3,600. Rowdy Tellez, $3,300. He does come with some pinch hit risk, being a platoon guy, but he is cheap. I do like the matchup for him. I just don't like the pinch hit risk, but he's cheap for a reason. The pinch hit risk is factored into everything that I did. So there's that as well. Checking quickly to see what Texas's recent bullpen usage looks like. They have two left-handed relievers in their bullpen. One of them pitched yesterday through 12 pitches. The other one pitched on Saturday. So I assume that they're both available. One of them, though, Andrew Chafin, is a setup guy. So if you get a situation where the Pirates just jump out to a big lead against Dunning, Chafin's probably not coming in the game. And in general, they're going to care less about matching up also. So I do like Tellez, just, would like him more if he didn't have pinch hit risk. And then the bottom of the order, also really cheap. Grandal, McKinney, Triolo, Bay, all very inexpensive. One negative is that Joey Bart batting cleanup and Yasmani Grandal batting sixth are both catchers. So on DraftKings, you can't play them together, but they both look fine in the spot. So getting to the Pirates in this park makes sense. Getting to Texas on the other side also makes sense. Their left-handed bats do look much better, but if you're stacking them, obviously you don't need to shy away from their good right-handed hitters. But so far this season, in a decent-sized sample, Luis Ortiz allowing a 271 expected ISO to lefties, only 123 to righties. Doesn't strike guys out at a high clip from either side, but it really makes somebody like Corey Seager look good to me. I would hope that I'm getting a lot of him. Josh Smith batting third, Nathaniel Lowe batting fifth. Those three guys from the left side look good. And then you can also, save some salary, go to the bottom of the order, work on like a wraparound stack potentially with Jonah Heim and Leody Taveras. They'll both be hitting from the left side. They're both cheap. Taveras gives you stolen base upside, but something like 8 through 3 gets you 4 left-handed hitters, including Seager. So there's, I think, a lot of ways you can attack Texas here, and they look good in this park against a pitcher in Ortiz that doesn't miss a lot of bats. Pittsburgh's bullpen has two left-handed relievers, rather. They should both be available today, but as was the case with Texas, one of them is Aroldis Chapman, who, if this game isn't competitive, is not pitching. So that kind of knocks them down to like one reliever if the game's going the way that you want it to for your stack. Seattle, not a great matchup against Grove, but it is in Dodger Stadium. Grove isn't a great pitcher overall, but this park is really good. And like I said previously, there's not a ton of really good hitters parks on this slate, but that's also amplified because you're talking about the Mariners. This is a team that is priced in a way that, priced the way they are because they play half their games in one of the worst offensive parks in baseball. If they played all of their games in Dodger Stadium, this team would be a lot more expensive than they are, and the prices didn't really move. So Cal Raleigh, I mentioned a minute ago, I really like him in particular. Always do, but when you get him in a good hitter's park and his salary doesn't really adjust, that's going to look good. So he stood out in particular when I was looking at stuff earlier, but it is just a nice park bump for Seattle on a slate where no offenses are really standing out. Yeah, it's Stone. I don't know why I said Grove. I mix those two up in my head constantly. But yeah, it's Gavin Stone. What I was saying was about Stone, though. Doesn't give up a lot of power. He's allowed a 114 expected ISO to lefties, 175 to righties, but again, doesn't miss a lot of bats. And you do have the Seattle lineup that strikes out a lot, but also has power, and they're getting a substantial park upgrade. I think somebody earlier had asked, TDID had said, is Gavin Stone too thin even against a team like Seattle who strikes out at a criminal rate? I think that Stone isn't like actively worse than other mid-range pitchers. If you wanted to say, I think he's getting like not much ownership. He's getting 7% ownership. I got 1%. At 7,500, he's not really different than a lot of these guys. If you said that you wanted to play him, I wouldn't tell you not to. He's not somebody that I'm getting much of, though. But I do like the bats against him just because of the park, the fact it's one of the better hitters parks on the slate, and that they do have power against the pitcher that doesn't miss a lot of bats. And also keep in mind that this lineup did get better at the trade deadline. You have Randy Arozarena now, who is certainly a hitter that I would like to get to here. Victor Robles leading off gives you some power, but also stolen base upside. Julio Rodriguez is back. So this is a deeper lineup than usual, or than it had been recently. You also may have a 3K Dominic Canzone who can do some damage from the left side. So Seattle looks pretty good. Now looking at the 5-man specifically, Pittsburgh at the top, already talked about them, but they are cheap outside of the two guys that I really like. But the fact they are cheap outside of those guys makes it a little bit easier to get to them. San Francisco didn't talk about yet, but they have one of the highest implied run totals on the slate, despite playing in San Francisco. So for one, that's just, it speaks to how weird this slate is as far as there being decent pitchers and not a ton of good hitters parks. It also is, you do want to keep in mind that implied run totals aren't all created equally. So even if the Giants score, let's say, the second most runs on the slate because they have the second highest implied run total, there's a good chance that the way those runs are scored still isn't the most conducive for DFS because they're not home runs. But the other side of that is that San Francisco is a team that generally has an implied run total much lower than this. So as a result, they're kind of obviously and naturally underpriced. I also do like the matchup here against Jonathan Cannon. In particular, he has struggled with left-handed bats, and that is something I expect to continue. That is something that generally occurs for pitchers that have his type of stuff. Not a lot of swing and miss stuff, looking to get the ball on the ground. And for most left-handed hitters, ground ball pitchers that aren't going to get swings and misses and throw right-handed, they're just leaving pitches right in the swing path that a lot of left-handed hitters really, really want. So it's not very surprising that while righties have a 129 expected ISO against Cannon this year, lefties have a 221 expected ISO. It does set up nicely for whatever lefties are in this lineup. Michael Conforto, very interesting to me at 3,900. Yaz is cheap at 3,200. Wade is cheap at 3,400. Bailey's cheap at 3,500. Brett Wisely at 2,900, assuming he's in the lineup. So this is another team where, you're still sacrificing some of your power upside just because of the park that it's in, but you can put really good power hitters around them because of how cheap they are. There's nothing stopping you from getting a very cheap San Francisco stack and then having, Shohei Ohtani plus two other good hitters or, whatever you want to do. You can get really, really good players around San Francisco to where, let's say they score 8 runs, then it's only like 1 home run or something. They're cheap enough that there's still a pretty good chance that you're going to be live in tournaments because you're just going to have good power hitters and good pitchers around them. San Francisco looks good to me, especially as 5-mans. The Angels are interesting here. I think this just has to do with Seth Lugo's ownership and the park. It is a good park for scoring runs. Like I said, it's good for everything offensively except hitting home runs. The Angels do suck. Lugo is good at preventing runs, but he's getting around 15% ownership, if I remember correctly, somewhere in that range. The Angels are cheap. You have a 2K guy hitting cleanup. Sean Wells cheap at 3,500. The most expensive guy in their lineup is Logan O'Hoppe at 4,300, batting 6th. So they do not only give you that same sort of lineup type where you can have really, really good hitters and really good pitchers around them, but they also negatively correlate with a somewhat popular pitcher. So that's why they're showing up a little bit as 5-mans. I wouldn't expect them really to be showing up otherwise. Yeah, 10% total Angel stacks, 8% as 5-mans. They aren't really a team where I want to be grabbing like one-offs or anything like that because, at least all that often, because the matchup against Lugo isn't good. Really what you're trying to do is say every pitcher, no matter how good they are, they're going to have some percentage of games where they just don't have their stuff for whatever reason. You're hoping it's that day. And if that's the case, you just want every Angel you can get. It's a lot harder to justify like grabbing one Angel against Seth Lugo or something like that. So as far as 5-mans go, they make some sense. And you're seeing the same thing here with Boston going against Kikuchi. Like I said, he's my highest owned pitcher. I have a lot of him, but it's not hard to explain why Boston would be showing up as a stack, given that they do have a lot of power upside. And if they do well, half the field or 30 to 40% of the field probably just lost a pitcher. So they look good as a full stack to me. I wouldn't really want them as a lot of one-offs, although they do at least have power. And if you wanted to grab 1 or 2 of them against Kikuchi and just try and get 1 or 2 home runs, that is obviously fine. Seattle, I talked about. The White Sox, kind of the same thing. Not a very good offense overall, not a good park, but Kyle Harrison's not a great pitcher. He does give up power to righties. 202 expected ISO allowed to right-handed hitters so far this season. There's not a ton of that in the White Sox lineup, but you do have a $4,400 Luis Robert. You have a 4K Andrew Vaughn. If Corey Lee's in the lineup, he's a $2,200 catching option. Vargas is $2,600. So just another really, really cheap lineup where if they get to a pretty popular pitcher in Harrison that was pulling around 20% ownership, you're in a really good spot and you'll have really, really good hitters around them. Kansas City, it seems like I'm using a lot more as mini stacks than full stacks, only getting to about 5% 5-mans, but I had 24% overall. So they're my highest 2-man stack. They're my third highest owned 3-man, third highest owned 4-man, but only 4% there. So Kansas City, I'm getting them in a lot of lineups, but not necessarily playing all 5 of them together a lot. Probably has something to do with ownership. Just their stack's going to be pretty popular. Also, the park not great for hitting home runs, but I do like getting to them as a whole. But 5-man's not showing up a ton. Same goes for Toronto and Tampa. So all 3 of my highest owned total, the 3 teams that I'm getting the most exposure to overall are actually middle of the road as far as 5-mans go. I am getting a lot of 4-man Tampa as well, though. So them and KC both, when you include 4 and 5-mans, are close to the top. Toronto, I think, is kind of just more of a mini stack team for me. I'm getting some 5-mans, but not as much as other teams. Cincinnati, like I said, in the same boat with the White Sox, the Angels, um, Red Sox, where you're going up against the popular pitcher. I did mention it though, like if you asked me to pick one team going against a popular pitcher that I want to get to, and they're the only one I could play, Cincinnati's actually the one that I, in my head, like the most. And it's just because of how they match up with Gossman. Gossman gives up power to both sides of the plate, and he allows stolen bases. And this is a team that does have guys that will run. I mentioned it in my article for Endgame subscribers earlier, trying to pull that up to find it now. But on Cincinnati, De La Cruz has 59 stolen bases. Everybody, obviously very aware of that. Steer has 20, as I mentioned earlier. And then each one of India, Fairchild, Benson, Fraley have stolen at least 10. Those guys all, not all of those guys are in the lineup today, but you have De La Cruz in the lineup. You have Steer in the lineup. You have Fraley in the lineup. And you have India in the lineup. So you don't have Fairchild, you don't have Benson, but you have 4 of those guys that have stolen at least 10 bases this year against a pitcher in Gossman that doesn't hold runners very well. That combined with the home run upside and the ownership coming into Gossman, I really like Cincy. They would be my favorite, quote unquote, like bad offense to get to, or favorite contrarian offense to get to that negatively correlates with a popular pitcher. If I just had to pick one, obviously, like I said, I am going to go with my full process and data and all of that, and as a result, I'm getting to a little bit more Angels in Boston, Chicago. But as far as being able to like explain things that I like in a matchup, other than, well, maybe the pitcher will be bad and then you win tournaments, which is pretty much the case with like the White Sox and the Angels. In the case of Cincinnati, there's very obvious flaws that Kevin Gossman has that the Reds absolutely can exploit. So that's interesting to me. Now, going through and looking at individual players, obviously, for the most part, they are going to line up with the stacks that I'm getting to. Job Rosa says, does Grant McCray have pinch hit risk? So for one, we don't know for sure that he's in the lineup because we don't have a Giants lineup, but left-handed bat, projected to hit 9th. Exactly how much pinch hit risk he has would depend on what the actual lineup looks like and who is not in it for the Giants. The White Sox have 2 left-handed pitchers in their bullpen. One is definitely available today. One probably not, but maybe. Jared Schuster threw 43 pitches on Saturday. Didn't pitch yesterday. I don't know if he's available today. Fraser Ellard, whoever that is, threw 11 on Saturday. I'm sure he's fine today. So I would say there is probably some amount of pinch hit risk, but it's not like the White Sox are like loaded with lefties in their bullpen. It's also not like they're a real baseball team. So whether or not they even bother to match up a ton, who knows? And also, like, if you have one lefty that you can use, you're probably going to save him to face like Michael Conforto, not Grant McCray. So I wouldn't worry too much about McCray, especially if it's in a Giant stack, which it probably should be. Probably not somebody I'm looking to use as a one-off all that much, because if he is in your Giant stack, then obviously you're hoping the Giants just throw a bunch of runs on Jonathan Cannon, and then the White Sox really couldn't care less about matching up. And similarly, the Giants aren't really going to care about pinch hitting. So overall, like more than 0, but not something that I would be overly concerned about. At catcher, getting to, really spread out at catcher. Freddie Fairmean the most, batting 6th for Kansas City. No issues with that. 10% ownership. I'm getting to about 10%. Not surprising to see Joey Bart here around 2x the field. I mentioned I'm getting to the Pirates a lot. He gets a nice park upgrade in Texas, going up against a pitcher that gives up power, albeit more so to lefties than righties. But Bart, can do some damage. He's batting cleanup. He's cheap. Cal Raleigh, I mentioned I really like him in that park. Good power hitter, even when he's in Seattle. So throw him into Dodger Stadium, and that looks pretty good. Patrick Bailey, Salvador Perez, Tyler Stevenson. Pretty flat, or very flat, really, on my catcher exposures. Wanted to make sure that I took off the Toronto stacks. So very flat on my catcher exposures. The field also pretty flat. Highest owned guys for the field, Freddie Fairmean and Salvador Perez. So pretty similar to me. Nothing that stands out as too crazy. The field's not really aggressive on any particular catcher. Neither am I. I don't have any like huge fades on anybody. I don't have any huge stands on anybody from a catcher standpoint. Just pretty flat. Along with the field, 3x on Logan O'Hoppe, but that's still like 6% to 2. So nothing that really stands out to me there as particularly interesting, other than I'm probably just playing the catcher in my stack a lot. That's an approach that in general is just going to be good because there's not a lot of good hitting catchers in baseball. I would rather be saving when I can my one-offs or two-mans or whatever for guys that can actually hit, not some, just random shitty hitting catcher. So makes sense a lot of the time, especially if they're in a good part of the lineup, to just be mixing catchers in with whatever stack you're going to. First base, also exceptionally flat for me. Rowdy Tellez at the top. I mentioned before, does have pinch hit risk here, but he matches up well with Dane Dunning. It is a nice park upgrade. Hopefully, the Pirates just throw runs on Texas early on, and then you don't have to worry about Tellez getting pinch hit for as much. Ryan Mountcastle, I like this price tag against Peterson. Peterson's not a bad pitcher, especially in terms of limiting power. It's not a great park for hitting home runs, but Mountcastle's just a little bit too cheap for the power upside that he offers at 3,900. I think he looks pretty good here, a little over the field there. Ty France, getting to him some against Gossman. Mostly, I would assume, in Cincinnati stacks. He's only 2,900. Doesn't give you stolen base upside, but does have some power upside, especially for that salary. Mentioned Andrew Vaughn when I talked about the White Sox stacks. Mentioned Wade when I talked about the Giant stacks. I like the spot for Wade here against the pitcher in Cannon that just struggles with left-handed power, doesn't miss a lot of bats. Vaughn going up against the pitcher in Harrison that gives up power to right-handed hitters, even though the park isn't ideal. The field getting to Brandon Lau 12% of the time. I have 5% at first base. I probably have more at second base. I would assume I'm actually around the field, if not a little bit higher on Lau, but we'll find out in a second. JD Martinez, first base outfield, same kind of thing. 12% ownership. I'm getting to 3% at first base. Probably going to end up, I would guess, be a little bit under, but we'll find out just because I wasn't getting to a lot of Met stacks, which I think somebody actually asked earlier how I felt about Rogers. He's 6,300. And so on a slate with bad pitching, if you just want to use him as a value play, I think that's okay. Not because I think he's any good. He has a 17% K percentage this year. The matchup's not good. It's more so just like the opportunity cost isn't great at pitcher. I would say if I had to choose between Dunning or Rogers as like a low-owned sub 7K guy, I would rather get to Dunning. I just think he has more strikeout upside than Rogers does. But as far as going against him, I do think that the park, like if the Mets are going to be popular, I do think that the park makes me kind of just want to go to some other spots a little bit more. That being said, from a Met stack standpoint, there is also add-on upside once Rogers gets out of the game. The Orioles bullpen right now is exceptionally bad. Kimbrel has the yips. Like he cannot throw strikes, and when he does, it's right down the middle. Danny Coulomb, Jacob Webb, two of their best relievers are both on the injured list. Sir Anthony Dominguez is closing now, so he's not pitching against your Mets stack unless the Mets have already failed, essentially. Yenny Cano is in the same situation where he's only pitching high leverage innings at the end of the game, so he doesn't really matter from an add-on standpoint. This is a bullpen where if the Mets get to Taylor Rogers and make it so Cano and Dominguez aren't going to be used, then there's just kind of unlimited scoring available for them throughout the rest of the game. So it doesn't look like I'm getting to them a lot, but that's kind of my take on the Mets and Rogers, is that it is a really high upside spot. I just don't love the park for the ownership it looks like the Mets are going to be getting. Vinny Pasquantino, I am getting a lot less than the field, which I don't love because I do really like his matchup against Fulmer, given how much power Fulmer's giving up to lefties, but is what it is. Like I said, 150 lineups, have to make some exceptions somewhere. Shohei Ohtani, 5% at first base. I assume I have some more in the outfield. As far as guys that I'm getting, a lot more than the field, looks like Ty France, the high mark, Andrew Vaughn, Rowdy Tellez. Not the most exciting guys, but I understand why I am getting to them. And a lot of this, again, just comes back to me being pretty flat in my stacks as well. Second base, Michael Massey. Field's getting to a lot at 14%. I'm getting to a lot at 19%. I like that he is playing second base and not DHing. That lowers his pinch hit risk a bit. I like the matchup that he has going against Fulmer. Like I said, I like the price tag. I like the position. That's another thing that maybe is driving Pasquantino down a little bit for me compared to Massey, is that there's just going to be more opportunity cost at first base than there is at second base. Christopher Morel, batting or projected to hit third. I don't know that we have a Tampa lineup yet, but projected to hit third against Boyle. He's 4K. He does have power. Again, I don't love the individual matchup against Boyle because of the type of pitcher that Boyle is, but I do like the price tag. I do like the fact that Morel is likely to be hitting in the middle of the lineup for a team that has a relatively high implied run total. Will Wagner, I like quite a bit. Just cheap, has upside, 2,400, second base, batting sixth. Good matchup as well. This is somebody that just came up from the minor leagues and now is essentially facing another minor league pitcher. So I think he looks like a good value. I'm happy to get to him. Popular guys that I'm not getting to. Still not getting to quite as much Lau. Again, I had like 5% at first base. So I'm around 9% total on Lau. Fields at 12. Adam Frazier, maybe I'm getting him in the outfield, but if I'm not getting the Frazier, I wouldn't mind that at all. He does have pinch hit risk, but also beyond that, he's just not the type of guy that I'm ever going to be that concerned about not getting to when he's popular because his median projection is good for his salary. He has multi-position eligibility, which makes it easy to fit him into lineups. He's in a popular stack, which means he correlates with a lot of other players that are being played at high levels. But he's not somebody that hits a lot of home runs. He doesn't steal a million bases. Not that he can't have a game where he hits a home run and steals a base, but generally the good but not great, the good Adam Frazier game is 3 singles and a run or 3 singles and 2 runs scored. It's a game that you can just make up with an abundance of other hitters. So whenever he's popular, I typically don't get there that much. So if that ends up being the case when we get to outfielders, I'm not going to be upset about that. Moving over to third base. Again, a pretty flat position for me. Generally just means that there's a lot of guys that I think look good but not great. Mark Vientos, good matchup for him against Rogers and the Orioles bullpen. So pretty close to the field there. I am happy about that with him hitting second. Caminero, third base shortstop. I assume I have some at shortstop as well, but he's only projected for 6% ownership. I'm getting to 10% just at third base, which is interesting. Makes it pretty likely that I am pretty significantly over the field on him. He is a very, very highly regarded prospect, one of the top prospects in baseball. He is affordable. He has MPE. He's probably hitting in the middle of the order. I wish he stole bases because that would be something nice against Boyle, like with how often he puts guys on. It would be nice if you had a stolen base guy, but does project to be an above average hitter right out of the gate. So I like this price tag. I like the MPE and all of that. Caballero, not as good a hitter, but also not likely to get tons of ownership, though he somehow is projected for more than Caminero. Wouldn't be surprised if that changes. That just seems like really weird since Caballero is probably hitting toward the bottom of the order and also more expensive at the same positions as Caminero. But either way, if you flip these ownership numbers, I think that I end up playing it pretty similarly. Caballero, though, will steal bases. So that is something I like here. We don't have a big sample on Joe Boyle. I'm not sure how good he is at holding runners, but at least he's putting guys on. And Caballero has stolen 35 bases this year. So there is a ton of stolen base upside there with him. Jake DeWitt said, except Caballero has shortstop eligibility too. So does Caminero. Josh Young, third base. Even with the field, I like the power upside he gives you. Like I said, Ortiz does give up significantly less power to righties than lefties, but Young has plenty of power and correlates with those left-handed bats for Texas that you would like to get to. So this is another position that, I'm pretty flat. The field's pretty flat. Dylan Moore getting 10% ownership. I only have 3 at third base. We'll see what I have at short, but not taking any crazy stands there. At shortstop, I hopefully am getting a lot of Corey Seager. Haven't looked yet, so I don't know, but I would like to be. I would also like this screen to unfreeze because that would make this a lot easier. All right, well, while I'm waiting for that, I will run back through some questions. Bridgeline said, do people lean towards early games for security? They shouldn't if they do. You get your lineups like 3 hours ahead of time. It's not like NBA where you're dealing with a bunch of late news. JF said Mets 4, Red Sox 4 with a Witt one-off. Spence Harrison is starting pitchers. Talking FanDuel, I assume, because you're cheating if that's DraftKings. Oh, okay, Red Sox 3, man, he corrected it. Yeah, it looks fine to me. You're getting negative correlation against Kikuchi with the Red Sox. You're getting the Mets in a good spot. Witt obviously is great. I don't know who Spence is, but Harrison is perfectly fine. Park plays up power to left field from Jake. I don't know what park we're talking about. If you're talking about Rogers Center, then yes. I feel like we were probably on that game. Yeah, Morel probably strikes out a lot. All right, caught up, and my screen is working now. Bobby Witt at the top. Not getting as much Seager as I would have liked, but I am in line with the field. Bobby Witt in line with the field, taking a nice stand, 2x on O'Neal Cruz. I like that one. Like I said, the team that he is on is cheap enough that I can afford this $5,300 salary. He has some left-handed power. He can steal some bases. Dunning, if I remember correctly, is pretty decent at holding runners. He's either good or he's decent. He's not great. Cruz could certainly still try and steal on him. He's not bad though, but I do at the very least like the park upgrade power upside for Cruz. Lindor, again, even with the field. So I am happy that as we go through this, it seems like I'm more like in line with the field on the Mets than below the field. I was kind of scared to just not really be getting to them like it seemed at first base, given what I was saying about how shitty the Orioles bullpen is. But Ellie De La Cruz, like that one a lot. Stolen base upside in addition to power upside. Dylan Moore pretty much around the field. Caballero around the field. No huge fades for me at shortstop. Ernie Clement, I'm not really getting too much, but that's not overly exciting. In the outfield, Josh Lowe, MJ Melendez, Shohei Ohtani, George Springer, guys that I'm very happy to see here near the top. Josh Lowe, again, not the best matchup because Boyle doesn't throw strikes and because the park isn't good for hitting home runs, but Josh Lowe is just too good of a hitter to be $3,700. And so I'm happy to get to him as an upside guy that offers value. Melendez, I like the matchup against Fulmer. He's batting fifth. He's cheap. He's popular, but I think that he should be. Has some left-handed power against a pitcher that doesn't miss a lot of bats and gives up left-handed power. Ohtani, self-explanatory. Springer, pretty self-explanatory, going up against a guy making his debut. Adolis Garcia positively correlates with those other Texas bats that I do really like. Like I said, prefer lefties against Ortiz, but Garcia has a ton of power. He has stolen base upside. If Smith and Seager and Lowe have good games, it does increase the chances that Garcia is having a good game as well. Varsho looks good. I already touched on Reynolds a bit. Happy to get to him as a pay up to be contrarian option. That $5,700 price tag is just going to make people not want to click him, but I do like this matchup quite a bit. Ref Snyder has pinch hit risk, but still think at 4K he's a reasonable play against Kikuchi. The Red Sox don't always pinch hit for him. So I don't mind getting there, even though there is that pinch hit risk. Houston's bullpen obviously has no shortage of right-handed pitchers. Didn't even need to look at that. Don't love Ref Snyder. Kind of like Tellez. I don't love it. There is pinch hit risk, but they don't always pinch hit for him. He does have home run upside. Popular outfielders that I'm not getting to. JD, just not getting a ton of him at first base or in the outfield. So getting to Lindor, getting to Vientos from the Mets, but I guess overall not getting to as much Mets. JD's fine. Pete Alonso's fine. If you want to play them, great. They're just guys that I happen to not really be getting as much of. I'm still not getting to Adam Frazier here, which, like I said, is perfectly fine for me. Yordan Alvarez, I'm not getting to. If you want to play Yordan Alvarez, he's obviously very, very good. Tanner Houck is a good pitcher. There are plenty of other outfielders that I like. Conforto, I mentioned, I like. I'm pretty much in line with the field there. He does also grade out well for me in my pitch type model, in addition to just being somebody that I would expect would hit well against what Jonathan Cannon throws. So that's all I have for you for this one. Ran a little bit long. Timing is off since I hadn't done it in a while, but hopefully you all enjoyed the show. Hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Endgame Syndicate using the link in the description below, all of that stuff. Good luck on your lineups tonight. Be back here for the same show tomorrow and the rest of the week. I won't have any days off this week. So thanks for checking it out. See you back here tomorrow. Have a good rest of your night.